This is the only video you're going to need to watch to learn how to buy a house and get a mortgage in New Zealand in 2023. Let's get started. You probably recognize me as the Mortgage Man from my TikTok or my podcast. If you do not follow those things, the links are below in the show notes. But today we're going to talk about how to get a mortgage in New Zealand for your first home. And it is going to take a bit of time to go over this, but we're going to cover everything from deposit size, new builds versus existing properties, amount of income you need, debt levels, and how children affect your chances. So get a pen and paper because we're going to be here for a while. Make sure you save this video because it's going to be a great reference point when you're working towards your goals. And at the end, I'm going to give you tips on how you can fill the gaps to make sure that you can get your first home. So the first thing we need to work on is your budget. Now, your budget's going to dictate how much deposit you need, how much income you need, and pretty much everything else. And unfortunately, in some areas where you want to live, house prices are going to be too expensive for what you can realistically afford. So the first thing I want you to do is go onto Trade Me, type into the search the area that you want to live, the number of rooms you want, and just see what the house prices roughly are. For example, let's just say for easy numbers sake, $1 million is your budget. So you want to buy for $1 million. When you look at the bank's rules, the two things that they're going to want you to have is a deposit and enough income to pay back the mortgage in 30 years' time. Now, because you're a first home buyer, you can get away with a 10% deposit. So 10% of 1 million is 100,000, which means your loan amount is going to be 900,000. So do you have enough income to pay back $900,000 in 30 years? Now, there's all these complex calculations, but realistically, you need to earn as a household income about 1/5 to 1/6 of that $900,000. I'll work through some examples shortly. Let's go back to the deposit. The deposit of $100,000 can be made up of lots of different things. Number one, in New Zealand, usually KiwiSaver. So if you're not in KiwiSaver, please get in KiwiSaver. It's really good for buying your first home and for retirement. So you've got your KiwiSaver. You can also use savings. You can also use a cash gift from a friend or family member. And as long as those things add up to $100,000 in this scenario, then that deposit box has been ticked. Of course, if you only want to buy for $500,000, then you only need a $50,000 deposit, and so forth. Now, once you've got the deposit, of course, you need the income to service the mortgage. Now, this is a little bit harder to figure out. And what I use as a rule of thumb when we're talking to people on the phone without having the complex calculators in front of us is that 1/5 rule. So if you need to get a mortgage of $500,000, your household income should be $100,000 because $100,000 is 1/5 of 500,000. Now, when you work with a mortgage broker, we do all this calculations for you, but it's good for you guys to understand how this process works. So what the bank is looking for is, can you, as a household, pay back that mortgage when it is tested at a higher test interest rate with your usual expenses and still save some money? So let me break that down. If you're trying to buy this $1 million property that I've talked about, you need a mortgage of $900,000. Can you afford to pay back $900,000 on your current incomes with your current expenses if the interest rate on that mortgage was 8.6%? That's what the test rate is today. Today is the end of April 2023. The test rate does go up and down depending on what the interest rates are doing. So at the moment, it's quite high. It's the highest that I've ever seen it. Now, if the bank can show on those calculators that you can pay off that mortgage on a test rate of 8.6% and still save money, then they'll give you the mortgage. However, let's dig a little bit deeper on these expenses. If you've got debt, then that's expensive and that's going to bring your loan amount down or mean that you're going to get declined. Now, debt can be anything from student loans, afterpays, credit cards, personal loans, bad credit, anything like that needs to go into the expense column. Our advice is to have this less than $10,000 in total. On top of that, other expenses will be obviously children. Children are expensive because of childcare. New Zealand's childcare is one of the most expensive in the world. So if you've got 2 kids under 3, your childcare is going to be significantly more expensive than someone who doesn't have kids or has older children. And that's going to affect how much you can borrow. The key thing that you need to think about as well before we get too deep into this is what kind of property you want to buy. At the beginning, I said that you could buy something with a 10% deposit. Today's current rules make it so much easier to buy a new build property with a 10% deposit as opposed to an existing property. What is a new build? A new build is a house that is currently being built, hasn't been built yet, or just finished being built, but you are the first owner since CCC has been issued. CCC is basically the council coming along and saying that it's safe and insurable for you to live in. If you were to buy a new build, it means basically that you don't need to make as much money if you're buying with a 10% deposit compared to if you're buying an existing property. Now, this rule has only been around the last 12 months and it probably will change. But for the time being, if you're hell-bent on buying an existing property, you may not be able to at the same level that you can buy a new build. So, what can you do to increase your deposit? What can you do to increase your income? And what can you do to speed up this whole process? And what's the next steps? Now, the easiest way to increase your deposit is to get a gift. Obviously, this is not available to everybody, but that is the easiest way. Otherwise, if you suck at saving money, increase your KiwiSaver contributions because you know that you can't touch that money. What's the easiest way to increase your income? Ask for a pay rise. If you're self-employed, make sure you talk to a mortgage broker so we can understand exactly how you're paid, because there's add backs that we can use to increase your income. You could also get flatmates. Most banks will allow a flatmate or 2 to contribute up to $240 per week per room, which is going to increase how much you can borrow. If you've got lots of debt, then pay that down. If you're thinking of getting children, maybe wait until you buy a house because it's going to be a lot harder to get a mortgage once you've had them. And the next steps is to ask and get pre-approval. I can do that for you. It's very easy. We do a fact find, you fill it out, we run it through the bank's calculators, upload your documents, and then once we've got everything, asked all the questions, we send it off to the bank. And then I hold your hand to make sure you understand how to actually buy a house and how to pay back a mortgage. Now, whenever you work with a mortgage broker, we get paid by the bank. So a mortgage broker is essentially free for you to use. So if you haven't followed any of my stuff in the past, go down into the show notes below, follow me on TikTok, start listening to my podcast, and go apply for a mortgage if you think that you're ready to try and get pre-approval.